All right. Hi, everyone. We're at Safe Routes to School Academy week 2. The topics we're covering today, we are covering equity, introductions. We'll talk about equity, centering the community voice, the local highlight story, and then that call to action. Just a reminder, last week's call to action was we encourage you to review your community safe routes to school plan or another transportation plan. We know that not all of you specifically focus in safe routes to school. Some of you may focus more on that broader community transportation landscape. In addition to that, our second call to action was to identify 1 to 2 stakeholders and send an introductory email, either to reconnect, connect, didn't have to be a big ask, but really trying to get to know each other and have another partner in this work, as it is so important. So as a big group discussion, as we heard last week, we wanted the other kind of breakout discussion to be a longer time. So we'll just do the big group first, which will be quick. If anyone wants to come off mute just to share any reflections from the call to action of last week, you're more than welcome to. Is there anything that you learned? Anything you want to share? Anyone you reached out to? I know some of you did it, I'm hoping. We're able to get into the visualization tool to see where those safe routes to school plans are. Yeah, Kristen.
Hi, this is Kristen with Nicola County Public Health. I have a phone call scheduled Friday with the Public Works Director at one of my local communities. So that was one follow-up I got.
That's a win. Anyone else? Otherwise, I did put in the chat if you all could just do your warm welcome in there. Your name, your organization, and your favorite winter activity, as we see some other folks are trickling in. Did anyone else have any key takeaways from the call to action? Okay. Well, we'll continue on. If you want to share at any point, you're welcome to chat, raise your hand, come off mute, and so forth. All right. So before we start talking about equity, we did really just want to, as a team, acknowledge what is taking place across Minnesota and across the country as of now. We know that they're targeting schools. It's going to be impacting our programming. It has already, we've heard from coordinators and so forth of kind of the shift in priorities and what could be focused on safe routes to school. So Kelly and I just wanted to acknowledge that and also provide some support in if you are having interest in continuing to implement safe routes to school. There's a few items that we can focus on this winter and spring that would still leverage and really have those sticky points to a safe routes to school program, but not risk those communities that are currently being targeted. So a couple of them, one of them is focusing on education. As we know, education is one of the stickiest ways to keep safe routes to school in a community. Regardless if funding goes away, regardless if a position goes away, if teachers and staff are trained in bike education, walk education, oftentimes that new person that would come in would then say, oh, you already do this, I will just learn it and we will continue it. So there's walk, bike, fun education, which is walking and biking education. There's also the new On My Way safety education that can be supportive for in school. There's also different in-class engagement that you can be doing. For instance, in Bike to School Day, we're doing poster contests statewide. And this could be something that could be done in the classroom or remote, depending on where your students are. And then we are going to be having to adjust bike trains, walking school buses, and field trips at this time. So just know, do what you can. It's a state and a national level right now that there's going to be some adjusting as to how we can do safe routes to school to really keep everybody safe. So we are here if you need any help, support to think through ideas of how to still meet your community where they're at. We just want to acknowledge that. And with that, our topic today is all about equity, centering community voice. Oh, slides are. I'm going to try to play this. Let's see if it works. I have a feeling it probably is not going to, but we can try. So I'm going to play it. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear it. Otherwise, we can put the link in the chat and you can watch it as the follow-up resources. Can you hear it? No?
No.
Okay. I will put it in as a follow-up resource and you can listen to it then. Just because it is really important and really talks through moving towards mobility justice and all of the factors that are important to think through for making somebody have that ability to get to where they need to be, both school and home, but also parks, libraries, works, all those type of ideas and things. Okay, we're going to just go through a few slides of data just to kind of illustrate when we're talking about safe routes to school and equity, how is it impacted in our communities. So the access to automobiles, if you are Latino or African American in general, you have decreased access to automobiles. And then if you really think through that equity factor of low income, so socioeconomic status, that even increases even more. We know from data that children are more likely to get killed while walking if you're African American and Latino. It's because those children, potentially of low income communities, are more likely to walk and bike when they get to school. So thinking through how do we shape our programming to really support all students' safety getting to and from school. And then there's this infrastructure built environment conversation. So communities with sidewalks, high income communities more likely have connected sidewalk paths, where low income communities have sidewalk gaps. The lighting as well, there's 75% of high incomes have that street lighting versus in those low income communities. So even the built environment that would support walking and biking to school is already at a gap and a deficient for certain communities. And this is when we think about when we prioritize who we're going to support, what school districts, what sites within the district should we prioritize. Those are some factors that we could consider. As we know, disproportionately and historically, those communities have bigger gaps. And we just wanted to call out a few words when we're talking about this. So inequity, again, is that unequal access of opportunity in that top left. Equality, they're even. They both have that ladder, but still that tree is leaning towards the left and that kiddo on the right cannot reach it. We're going to go on a clock formation. Equity is that kiddo on the right has a larger, taller ladder, so they're both being able to have that access to it. And then that justice is really straightening that tree to make sure that they have the opportunities and tools, fixing that system. Even if there's more support on one side than the other, making sure that everybody has that opportunity. In an active transportation picture, this is also what it could look like, right? If we do a bike fleet and it's equality, everyone gets a bike. Everyone gets a traditional 24-inch wheeled, two-wheel bike, and that is that. But for equity, for unified PE classes and making sure everyone has that opportunity to participate, the bikes might look different. It might be a tricycle, a larger bike, a smaller bike, and even a strider if you haven't, if you're just learning or if you're a little bit smaller. So really thinking through the equity and equality conversation. Here's the last one. I'm going to encourage a few of you to come off mute and just share what you see in the differences of these two pictures. Equality is on the left, equity is on the right in the form of infrastructure for walking and biking. What do you see?
a ramp on the right.
Yep. What else?
There's looks like there's speakers or whatever, probably to say what the what the sign is.
Yep. So audio support.
The walking ramp is ribs for people using their sight sticks.
Yes. Julian coming in with all the technical terms, APS, tactical strips, pedestrian light, our infrastructure friend. Yes. Anything else you see in these pictures? One time when we were having this conversation with folks, somebody pointed out that the child was in front when crossing, and it felt there's a perception of the environment was safe enough to have the child lead and not have to be protected by adults. So every time I see this picture, that's what I see. Wonderful. Okay, I'm going to pass it to Kelly. She's going to do more of the background of how we have integrated equity into our program.
Sure. Yeah, and thanks for that last little bit. I've looked at that slide for years and I never thought the change between the little girl walking in front or not. And that makes a lot of sense. So you learn something new every day. But let's talk a little bit about how equity has evolved in the Safe Routes program and kind of how we at a state level are trying to advance equity and support that you're doing locally as well for equity. So the next slide talks a bit about where did equity change. We were one of the first states to add the equity E to our 6 E's. And it is something that we embedded into the strategic plan. We did a year long of thousands of hours of engagement with local partners and state and regional partners as well. And in our strategic plan, equity was something that folks felt was really important to include. So we made a third of the strategies that we are working on at a state level do have an equity theme or influence to them. So do some of our performance measures and really expanding and embedding equity wherever we could. Within our strategic plan, we do have a definition of equity. And we further define priority populations of those who might have been experiencing inequities. The next slide talks about the 6 themes or the 6 E's and how equity isn't its own strategy. You're not just going to have an equity strategy. It might be equity in education and you're looking to support all abilities in the PE class. Or it might be equity in engineering and going back to the slide we thought or saw and thinking about curb ramps and other supports like that. So that equity E is something that we weave throughout all the other E's of the Safe Routes to School program. Next slide. So how does this look? Sometimes when we're starting out, whether we're new in our position or we haven't really talked about equity before, it can be kind of uncomfortable. And I just want to acknowledge that and challenge you to lean into your discomfort and, share it with your partners that we're talking about this. It might be new. It might feel a little uncomfy. But this is a slide from our network call survey where we decided as a steering committee that in 2021, we were going to talk, or 2022, we were going to talk about equity at every network call. And you can see that the more we talked about equity, the more folks understood the different implications of equity. And this slide kind of shows that growth. The next piece of our Safe Routes to School program is, thinking about what equity looks like. And we often think about BIPOC or people of color, but also recognizing that, income levels can, change the ability for folks to participate in programs, children with disabilities. If someone has a car or doesn't have a car, what do you do if a kid's bike breaks down? Kids who are unhoused or are fluctuating in their housing situation. These are all things that are experienced in every community. Even if you don't have a very diverse population, you're going to have single parents, you're going to have kids experiencing, challenging home lives and things like that. So thinking about your community or communities and what are those things that about your community, where are those inequities, where are some of the discrepancies happening that you can build from. Yeah. So, recognizing that doing the equity work is hard. If it was easy, it would already be done. And there's, emerging capacity across the state. You might live in one area that has a lot of nonprofits that have partnerships or deep relationships into the communities that you are trying to work with, whether that is students of color or students of different ability levels. And there might be other communities across the state that don't have some of those organizations to represent. So it can be harder to reach those populations for engagement or education events and things like that. So again, building those relationships in your community can help you find those unique resources for your community, so you can make those connections and help advance change. So one resource that we have that will be part of, I believe, the task until next week is taking a look at our new equity and safe routes planning guide. So it talks about how we influence equity through all of our safe routes plans. One of our performance measures is that all of our safe routes plans do have equity strategies or themes throughout it. So it can be something helpful to take a look at if you're going to be launching a safe routes plan or you're reviewing your safe routes plan. It gets into what is equitable engagement and outreach? How can we show data in a different way to be impactful? And what are those strategies that maybe you already have? What would be an equity kind of lens over them? So, embedding walk, bike, fun education into any sort of DAPE or assisted kind of PE classes. And another piece that we have done is doing our STEP score, which stands for the Student Transportation Equity for Priority Populations, because, acronyms are fun. But looking at where do our resources go and making sure that we are not just looking at geographic parity, but where are the most inequities in our state. And so these are some of the data points that we look at for our future grants. So if you want to think about which community should I focus on, you can look at our STEP map to see where some of the high priority schools are, or get an idea of what those would look like. I'm trying to remember. This STEP score is also something that we use for both non-infrastructure grants, but our infrastructure grants also use that STEP score. So what we learned as grant reviewers, the other side of the coin, is it's really hard to score equity because it's not something that's apples to every community. So what we wanted to do with our grant applications was create a clear equity quantitative metric that can be scored and people know going into the grant application what that is. But there's also a narrative question with similar points that allows people who maybe have a low equity score to say, yeah, overall our community doesn't have as much equity needs as another community, but we are focusing on this mobile home park, and trying to allow those kids to walk to school and creating a connection for them in a walking school bus. And that helps to kind of take the two numbers and compare them and give the scoring community or scoring committees some additional help. So what we found is once we started embedding the STEP score into our grant applications, we started seeing our resources go to more underserved schools and communities. Next slide. Yeah, so thinking about equity from the start certainly makes it easier when you're planning events or strategies. Having that question of like, how are we advancing equity? What does equity look like in this strategy? And so sometimes that means that there might be a really loud parent in the room, but they, recognizing their voice and wanting to support them, but there might be people who have different power dynamics or don't have the capacity to email, call, show up to meetings. And so we want to try and recognize and respond to those as well. And thinking of that great way to allocate resources, whether that's your time or funding or materials, to those schools that might have higher needs, but less capacity for grant writing or for, organizing an event because they don't have a lot of volunteers. Next slide. Back to you.
It's back to me. Does anyone have any questions or follow up from those slides before we go on? Okay, if not, we wanted to give some pretty concrete examples of how equity looks in our programming. So what does that look like in practice? The first one is our program, and it's a statewide as well, or nationally. Ruby Bridges Walk to School Day is November 14th. If you have not heard of this yet, there's a 6-year-old girl named Ruby Bridges, and she walked to an integrated school. And this was her picture when she was 6. And it's just really showing the civil rights movement of the historic steps to combine communities. This takes place every year in November 14th. I think if it falls on the weekend, it maybe is that Friday beforehand. But there is a lot of really important conversations about this. We have also found that Ruby Bridges Walk to School Day is a really great day to engage middle school and high school students. We often are asked, well, how do we get the middle school and high school students engaged for walk to school events when we just pass out stickers, right? This has a larger conversation about equity, racism, bullying, and things like that that can be intertwined through the event day. The next one, as an example, is refurbished bike distribution. So police officers can recover bikes. They have to fix them up, distribute them. This is a really great example for rural communities as well, as they can distribute them to kiddos that maybe don't have the bikes. A couple other examples of more bike focus is bike mechanic classes in schools to be able to either refurbish their own bikes, or if other students can bring in their bikes, we can support that. It also gives them a tool of how to refurbish bikes and that interest of the active transportation. And then other communities, community ed does teaching bike mechanic classes. So this maybe expands outside of K-12 students, but into that community of when that bike breaks down, how can we make sure we can fix it again to continue on? We just wanted to also call out another example. Minneapolis Public Schools created a street harassment guide a few years back. And it really was a youth engagement program. It was incredible. If you would like to look at the guide specifically, we can send it out. But it identified students' needs of walking and biking to and from school. It was in coordination with staff and youth, funded by one of our grants. And really thought through the pedestrians and bikers are not at fault if they get harassed while walking and biking to school, both verbally, and how can they be equipped to make sure that they can get to school safety, even though it was not on their fault for receiving that harassment. A couple other examples. These ones are more for metro, and then next slide is all rural examples. So other things our community is doing to integrate equity into it. So again, Minneapolis School Harassment Guide. St. Paul has bike shops. They have an OWL program that does bike repair for students. It's a 1-week class. And then they put those bikes back in the community, which is pretty amazing. Richfield has starter bikes. A lot of schools and a lot of communities across the state are adapting and getting starter bikes for younger kids as a way to then be able to have the baseline skills. So when 4th and 5th grade comes and Walk Bike Fun curriculum gets into their PE classes, they are already familiar with how to ride a bike. Rochester does a walking school bus, again, from a community that has maybe a little bit more equitable or inequitable factors, addressing those and bridging that gap to get those kiddos walking and biking to school. Rural examples, SAIL program, which is in, I believe, Red Wing, East Minnesota. They have an alternative learning school bike fleet. We can try to find it and I'll put it in the follow-up email to you all. They were on a network call last year outlining their SAIL program, and it's pretty impressive how they're still integrating biking and walking into their setting that is a non-traditional setting. Story Stroll is another really easy lift for it. You can put it in multiple languages. It can engage all students and all abilities. Again, we've just shared examples of accessing the bike fleets. And then in rural, sometimes in metro still, You have some barriers that you have to address and how to think through can we still do programming when maybe the inequitable barriers are railroad crossings, farm equipment, big tractors coming down the highway. If you have consolidated schools, so that distance from home to school is actually really far and we can't do the traditional promotion of walk to school day. Are there things that we can do well on campus to promote that? And then again, the mobile home communities. We just wanted to call out a few other things. So outward facing materials, we have them translated. So any of our event days, we have in the main 4 languages, English, Spanish, Somali, and Hmong. If there's a different language that your community needs as a primary language, just let us know and we're happy to translate those for you. Encouragement events, again, we have translations, we can provide some stuff, but the one thing with this and encouragement events with equity is time is often the biggest barrier for engagement. And we know that from both staff implementation or staff supporting the event, along with parents coming to the event. So choosing where the events are, that we get those voices that we really need at the table, but also can we engage and recruit partners to be at those tabling events that we can use as billable hours, right? So can you get folks from statewide, say for us to school? I don't really want to volunteer for the whole state, but if you need us, we will be there. But do we have local healthcare partners, senior volunteers, the Rotary, National Honor Society for volunteering requirements, PTO, PTA, things like that, to make sure that the events can take place, but knowing that that gap of time is the biggest barrier. And then some of the other ways in which we can address equity or remove some of those barriers is removing that financial cost for trainings. So the universal access to those key trainings, both at a statewide level and nationally, there's several that are also free of cost, allows more people to engage and be trained in those. Again, the education is one of the biggest, stickiest factors for sustaining safe routes to school programming. So can we put our time and effort into that to really start that as the baseline? And then from the equity work that we've done as a team, from the stakeholder interviews and engagement within the strategic plan, here are some of the lessons learned. Not all, of course, but the work is challenging. And sometimes we have to also reflect on how this might impact how we understand it, how we do our work, and then making time to be able to have that self-care and continue coming back so we don't get burnt out. If working in large groups, so thinking stakeholder groups, if you're doing safe routes to school planning, you have a wellness committee, so forth, creating that shared definition of equity, thinking through in our community, what does that definition of equity look like? It might look different from the community next to you, it might look different from the one across the state, but really thinking what that looks like for you all. Using data to really help identify those disparities. Yes, Diane, we will send it following. Disparities of in the community. We know a lot of times it's a, I've heard this or I know this because of the work, but if you have data behind it, it allows for an easier justification of why we're putting our funding, why are we putting our prioritization in this community. And then that feedback loop. So many communities get asked for surveys and data and engagement and their knowledge. And oftentimes these are the communities that yeah, they're often asked. So if we be able to do that feedback loop and say, we engaged with you because of this, and here's what we've learned, and here's what we're going to go forward with it, to really show that their time and knowledge is valuable. Leading with equity, again, should be a foundation at the table. As Kelly mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, acknowledging sometimes, I don't know if I'm saying this right, this might be a little bit uncomfortable. It might be a new topic for us. How do we feel when we hear the word equity? Things like that will just both allow you to lead with it, but also allow you to have conversations that are very truthful. And then, okay, I think that's all lessons learned. We will leave with this and then we'll go into breakout rooms, but If you're not actively working to undo the harms of the past injustices, are we perpetrating them? Just to think through as we continue into this conversation. Again, if this was easy work, it'd have been done a long time ago, but it's important work, it's hard work, and it's important that we show up for all of our communities. So with that, I heard you last week when you're like, hey, Sophie, we want longer breakout rooms. So you get that today. We are going to go into a breakout room for 15 minutes. And while we're in that breakout room, we're going to talk through what we've learned, reflections about equity, those examples, and sharing what equity would look like, either looks like in your community or how you would like to bring more equitable work into your community. We will put the prompts in this chat. We will also put the prompts in the chat breakout rooms. So you should be able to know what we're chatting about. Does that all sound good? Is there any reflections or questions before we go into those rooms?
Sophie, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
You say education is the stickiest. What do you mean by that?
I'm going to pass that one to Kelly because I actually stole it from Kelly.
Okay.
So a couple things. So education is a safe route strategy that is going to reach all the students in the school. So if Walk Bike Fun is done, during the PE class, all students are getting that opportunity how to lead or how to ride a bike. And that is a lifelong skill that they could use and hopefully become active transportation users as they get older. It's also something that once it kind of gets in the curriculum or the rhythm of a school year, we just kind of keep doing what we're doing. So it's more likely to continue on in that school, whether they've officially adopted the curriculum or it is just something that the PE teachers do and someone gets into that role and they're like, this is what they did last year. I'm going to do it too. Also, we have the bike fleets from the Bicycle Alliance of Minnesota that MnDOT has provided them that can get shipped around the state. One thing I know from my past public health work with PE teachers is they don't have a lot of money to get new materials or equipment for PE class. So being able to bring in a fleet of bikes is really exciting and something that's an easy sell, if you will, for them to keep going. The other piece is the On My Way materials, which helps with the active transportation education mandate. So something that all schools are required to do since 2023 is do some form of bike walk education in K through 8 grades. So Walk Bike Fun is more experiential, learning how to ride a bike. On My Way is more of like those safety tips that we're sharing out. And both of them can kind of get into the rhythm of that curriculum. So it's an easier thing that sticks on. Walking school buses are great, but they ebb and flow each year based on the volunteers and where kids live. So the education is a good starting strategy and something that should hopefully kind of linger on while you advance to other strategies in safe routes or healthy schoolwork that you might be doing. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I wasn't
Okay.
sure because sometimes when I think of the word sticky, like, it's not so,
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that's very helpful. Thank you.
totally. Yeah. And what I'm talking about is like more practice space. It gets in there. If you want to get to the true like SHIP PSE policy change,
Yeah.
you can have the school board or the school like adopt the Walk Bike Fun curriculum as something that's in their curriculum or have a resolution saying we want all kids to be able to learn how to ride a bike by 4th grade. And we're going to do this through the Walk Bike Fun curriculum and an annual bike rodeo or whatever. So they're good strategies to start with, and then there's certainly ways that we can reinforce them and make sure that they're going to stick around longer. But it's a strategy that's an easy ask for schools because education is what they do.
Right. Thank you very much.
Any
All
other
right.
questions? Otherwise, we'll hop to the breakout rooms. Okay. Let's hop and then we'll come back at, let's say 10:50. Give you 14 minutes to chit chat. Great.
Okay, they should be open, but you're not going there.
There they go.
And I will get you to a room, Diane. No, not yet. Okay.
I didn't go. I'm gonna try again. Join room 1.
Weird.
Mm.
No, says I'm on hold. Says I can't join, and then the message was you're on hold.
I'm trying to figure out how to get you there.
Okay.
Let's see if we can put you in a different room if that makes a difference.
Hi, Mike.
Hello.
We are just
Like-
getting to the breakout rooms, so you might get zoomed into a different room, Mike.
All right. Been a busy morning, so sorry I'm late.
It's all right. I'm glad you're here. All right, there goes Diane.
It should be sending you, Mike.
Here we go.
Okay.
All right, I'm gonna go off mute for or off camera. Bring them back at 10:50.
50. Will do.
Can you put in the room chats just those prompts?
Yeah, I'll see if I can figure that out.
Okay, thank you. Alrighty, would you like to bring them back in, Kelly?
Takes about a minute, but I got them closed.
Hopefully it's long enough. Welcome back. Did that seem good timing?
Mhm.
Better?
Yes.
Look at all these lovely faces before you all turn off your cameras. Hi.
Hello.
Hi, bye. Hi, bye. You can turn them off if you need to. We all know we have Zoom fatigue, Teams fatigue very quickly. Alrighty. Was there any key takeaways that anyone wanted to share? What did you talk about? What did you learn? I saw a lot of smiles, so I felt like there was some good conversation maybe.
Mhm. Well, I jumped on a little bit late into my group, but it seemed like that there was the common experience of people often just equating equity with race rather than
Mm.
looking at all the other variables that play a part of inequity. So that was an observation.
This is Kristen. I'll jump in on that. I have oftentimes used and appreciate, quite honestly, how easy it is to use adaptive bikes as an example of equity, because then it's not just thinking about race. And out in rural Minnesota, we have to do that because, but anyways, not that you don't have to do it anywhere, but you know what I mean? So I appreciate how easy it is to talk about equity in that, you know, when you have that as an example.
Hmm. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you for having those conversations. Hopefully it's the first of many. So for the local highlight story today, we just wanted to share what we feel could be an easier entry level event that would be focusing on equity work. So as we mentioned earlier in the presentation, Ruby Bridges Walk to School Day is in November. In this story, Brooklyn Center Community Schools in the Metro actually received a grant from Safe Routes Partnership. They do mini grants annually to support the Ruby Bridges Walk to School Day. And with that mini grant, they were able to hold a story walk. So you can see in that top left picture and in the bottom right picture, they put a story of Ruby Bridges on yard signs and then walked and read at the same time. So combining both that physical activity and literacy components of it. In addition, so they held it as a week-long event, not just a day, just to allow teachers to opt in when they had time in their classroom. But they had classroom conversations. You can see in the bottom right or bottom left picture, there are books about Ruby Bridges and conversation starters. That top left picture is a reflective question of what does kindness mean to me? And then one of the kind of unexpected benefits of having it as a week long, that bottom picture on the right was open during recess. So kids were able to opt in to walking and reading about the book during recess as a passive versus being in a classroom activity. And they had some really great turnout from that. So this is just an example. I know with SHIP folks on the call, this is an allowable activity as well, story walk. So if you have any questions or anything like that, reach out, but it was just a really great idea. And you could do one of these. You don't have to do all 4 of them as an event at your school. Okay, and with that, the call to action this week. So by next week on Tuesday, we are requesting 2 things of you. The first one is, and we'll send the links, we'll put them in the chat and send them in the follow-up, but to review and engage in the equity scorecard. So it is a card a worksheet that really thinks through a lot of factors of equity within either a project that is coming up that you're planning, a program that you already have, research that you're thinking through. So it can really be applied to really what you want to think through about equity. And then secondly is our equity and planning guide. And we were just asking for you to review this and then reflect on, was there a big takeaway? Was there something that you learned through this equity planning guide that maybe you hadn't thought of before? And then we will come back together next week and I will ask you to come off mute and share your takeaways. And with that, I will end the recording.